And we are live. Hello, everyone. Welcome to my YouTube channel, Tech with Peter and Banugo. And this is my second stream where I talk to experts about web performance, CDN, and caching. And today I have with me Robin Marx from Akamai. It's a pleasure to have Robin here with me. Uh, I would look over the chat to see if people can hear us clear. So I see a few people online, no comment yet. So so today we have Robin Marx from Akamai, who is a web performance expert, and I will leave him to introduce himself because I think he will do a better job of that than me.
Okay. Again, I'm Robin. I actually have a PhD in web performance, you could say, or at least a PhD in network protocols with a focus on their performance, which I did, which I finished, I guess, about 4 years ago now. And that then led into a job at Akamai, where at the CDN, of course, you want both front-end performance, front-end web performance knowledge, and also the back-end, so the protocols and what the network is actually doing, the performance of that. CDN is a nice mixture of the two. So I think I'm nice in my place there. What we do at Akamai is mostly assist existing customers with web performance. So a lot of my day-to-day job is doing performance audits on customers' websites, looking where they might improve, both in terms of front-end performance, um, but definitely also the Akamai configuration, of course, and the caching setup and all the fancy network features that we can do. They do require quite a bit of configuration, and people sometimes get it wrong, or they just don't know that some advanced features exist. And so we try to assist with that.
Oh, that's really nice. And what does it entail to have like a PhD in web performance? How much deep or wide do you have to go for that topic?
Yeah, so I went very deep into HTTP3 and Quick. So the new networking protocols, they were starting up, they were starting to get designed and deployed while I was doing the PhD. So my PhD started looking at HTTP2 performance back in 2015, such a long time ago. Um, and so the idea there was just looking at how well it actually performs. Turns out that there were a lot of issues with HTTP2 performance then that I helped kind of weed out. And then it came part of when it came time to do HTTP3, like part of the people actually designing and implementing the protocol at something called the IETF, so the Internet Engineering Task Force that actually writes the RFCs. And so I went very deep into the design of the protocol and especially the performance aspects of the protocol, implementing it myself. And in the end, I wrote most of the debugging tools, so new tools, development tools for the protocols there as well. So I guess that's quite normal for a PhD. You have to go deep in one very specific topic. I think I wouldn't even call myself an overall quick and HTTP3 expert because I don't know that much about the security aspects, right? If you want to be an expert, then you would need to do both security and the full performance suite, which I
Oh, okay.
can't fully claim. So you really, in a PhD, you really choose like one particular slice, and you go super deep on that. Which is what I did for H3 performance. But in addition to that, I also had a vested interest in web performance in general, right? So front-end web performance wasn't really a part of the PhD as such. It was just something I was interested in addition to that.
Oh, I see. And how this debugging tools is it used by the IETF or by your employer or just end users who test their performance, or rather the debugging tool?
Almost not by end users. It's mostly used by server-side deployments. So, for example, Facebook. is using a lot of what I did for their internal setup. Cloudflare is using a lot of it. Apple, it's even interesting if you know where to look in all of the development tool options. It's also in Firefox. Um, Ironically, it's not yet used at Akamai, but
Why?
I'm trying to fix that. They just have their own Akamai's HTTP3 stack is a fork of Google's HTTP3 stack. And Google did not because they had their
I'm not sure if it's from my end. Somehow I feel like the connection is breaking. Okay, I think I lost Robin. Let's see. Um, can you hear me, Robin? I think I lost you for a bit. Um,
it
let's
is
see.
me. Hello, can you hear me?
I can hear you now, but I'm not sure if it's something from my connection or from your end. If you heard me
Yeah,
before.
you were just gone for a couple of seconds. I'm also not sure if it's me or you.
Okay. Maybe, hopefully it's not me because I have a higher video quality for the broadcasts than before. So I'm not sure
That
if
could
that
be.
affects the quality of the call. Um, but that's quite,
Let's try it. Hopefully it was just a temporary glitch.
yeah, hopefully. Okay, then let me skip going to uh, try a different browser to join.
All
Because
right.
so I missed you a bit on the part where you were talking about how um, how you use the debugging tool, why Akamai doesn't use it,
Oh yeah.
and
hmm
yeah. But I would like to ask what's the name of the tool? Where can we find it?
So it's two parts. It's one thing is called qlog or quick log. It's a logging format for protocols, and then the other one is qviz, quick visualizations. Um, and both of those are just easily Googleable, I would say. So
So log.
QLOG,
Okay.
QLOG, and QVIS. And if you look those up, then you'll also see my name coming
Oh, I see
going
QVis.
past. Yeah.
I haven't found QLog. Oh, I think I saw this QVis some days ago, but I couldn't figure out what to do with it.
Yeah, it's definitely not something for your day-to-day user to do. This is really like low-level debugging tools for people implementing the protocols
Oh, okay.
or um, or debugging them.
Oh, yeah,
There are a
nice.
couple of example files in there that you can say like load example files, and then you can look at what the visualizations are supposed to do.
Okay.
Uh, it's kind of like Wireshark, I guess, for people who are familiar with that, but then a lot more visual, um, with a lot more different visualization options.
Yeah.
And the goal is to someday extend that to other protocols as well, like TCP and HTTP2, but that is long term, I would say.
I see this other Q log on the different repo, not from the Q quick working group. I don't know if they are the same or different. I see it looks like it's written in TypeScript.
There are several QLog repos.
Okay.
Yeah, the one that you're linking now, that's my original implementation for
Okay.
during the PhD. Um,
All
but
right.
it has evolved a lot from there. Yeah.
Yeah, I will drop the link in the channel so for people curious, they could
Yep.
find it. I would also maybe have a look later and see if it's something I can make use of. So actually, for my part, I got interested in a bit with the like CDNs, caching. Sometime last month, I've used CDNs a bit, like Cloudflare. I use Cloudflare for some of my stuff. I work with a past employer that used Akamai as well.
Hmm.
But I think Cloudflare is more popular, at least for me, because of the Cloudflare workers and cheaper to run those things. Uh, I listened to a podcast from the guys at changelog.com, the podcast. I don't know if you know about it. So there's a changelog podcast and quite a number of episodes they have, and I think they are moving away. They've been experimenting for a while with their front end caching for their resources and maybe trying to improve the cache hit ratio. And I think they've been experimenting with getting higher stuff with Fastly, Cloudflare. Not sure if they tried Akamai, but probably I think they did because they tried a couple others. And now what they are doing is they are trying to have their own caching system. So they one of the talk he did was like, let's build a CDN. So they are trying to build their own distributed cache
Hmm.
using Vanish Cache. And
Hmm.
that sounded very interesting to me. And I was like, okay, I've used CDNs, but I don't really know how they work. So being the kind of person that like to learn by trying and seeing how things work behind the scene, I started investigating like CDNs, how do they work, what is Vanish Cache. Then I found like repos like Squid, Apache Traffic Server. I was curious, okay, how does Cloudflare build their CDNs? And that was how this YouTube channel and live stream was born. Like, okay, let me talk to people to dig into
Hmm.
the core topic. But before I get into that part of the CDN, I would still like to touch a bit on your HTTP3 experience. How is HTTP3? I struggle to find how they relate to. Sometimes I hear HTTP3, sometimes I hear Quick. I know Quick is a protocol, but then I'm not sure if I should be saying HTTP3 or saying Quick. And maybe you can explain a bit.
Uh, yeah. So very simply put, HTTP3 isn't really the new thing. The new thing is Quick.
Okay.
Quick is a replacement for TCP. So TCP, the Transport Control Protocol, on which almost everything runs or ran, that was showing its age. So that's been around since the 80s. A lot of problems with that, and so they decided to just replace it with a completely new transport protocol, which is Quick, which deals a little bit better with things like packet loss, is a lot more flexible, is a lot more encrypted than TCP as well. And so Quick is really a complete renewal of that transport layer, and that meant we tried. That was a big part of my PhD, was that trying to run HTTP2 directly over Quick, because theoretically you should be able to do that, right? The whole layer idea, if you just swap out one of those networking layers, everything else should just work. uh, but Quick is too different from TCP. It makes too many changes. Or put it differently, HTTP2 was too reliant on TCP internals to actually make it work. So in the end, what we did was take HTTP2, change maybe 10% of it, maybe not even that, to make it run over quick. So for a very long time, it was also just called HTTP2 over quick. And then mainly for marketing reasons, we decided to call it HTTP3.
Okay.
So what that means is if you say HTTP3, that implies quick because you can't do HTTP3 over TCP. The same thing with HTTP2. If you say HTTP2, it's always over TCP because that can't run over quick. So it's really just a new version of that protocol stack, or at least the top of the protocol stack
Yeah,
that we're switching to.
that's interesting because I see it's had some features of UDP and TCP combined. And
Not really. Quick
okay,
runs over UDP
okay,
um, just to make it deployable on the internet. It doesn't need UDP at all. It just runs on UDP because most routers or firewalls or whatever know what UDP is. They wouldn't know what Quick is. So instead of waiting 10 years for all devices on the internet to upgrade to be configured to know what Quick is, they just said, okay, let's just put it on top of UDP and just do it like that. But on top of UDP, Quick really re-implements everything of TCP.
and if it
Like
doesn't use UDP, what would be the alternative, or what other way would it run?
running it directly on top of IP.
I see.
So, which in theory is possible, but again, most networking devices on the internet are configured to only know there are two protocols, TCP and UDP. That's it. You try to add a third one, you're going to run into a lot of deployment issues, practical issues.
So something worse than CrowdStrike.
No, it would just take 10 years before anybody would be practically able to use the new protocol, which they didn't want to wait for,
Yeah.
of course.
Yeah.
Um, I
Cool.
just do that.
I think that's a lot of networking info beyond my capabilities at the moment. So
Mm-hmm.
I would not be able to go deeper on IPs and stuff. I mean, I just know IPs on a higher level. Uh, so I would come back later on the IETF stuff, but
Mm-hmm.
now I can ask about CDNs. So from your perspective, how would you explain what a CDN is and why we need it, not just from a maybe from a business perspective, but as well from a developer's perspective, why they would need it and when they should use it.
Yeah, I think that makes most sense if you explain it historically, right?
Okay.
How they came about. The first versions of CDNs were mostly about scaling and performance, I guess, right? The idea is if you want to address a very large audience, you need a lot of computers. And especially like, let's say, retail e-commerce, they need a bunch of computers because they have a lot of sales on things like Black Friday, but they don't need all of that during a normal, let's say, Sunday, right? And if you have every individual company scaling up and down um, with a lot of computers, that would be a lot of waste. That's eventually where things like Amazon AWS and stuff also came in, right? So that's one aspect of that. You want an intermediary, third party like Cloudflare. They have all of the computers, and they need to deal with the peaks and the surges of traffic, so that you at the origin don't. The origin, you don't need to have this extreme scalability because you're offloading this to the CDNs. That's one aspect. The second aspect is, of course, even if the CDNs would just um, distribute all the computers, but they would send all the traffic still to your origin. They wouldn't do caching. You would still need a ton of computers to handle that kind of traffic at the origin. So it's the second part of that is offloading actual traffic that comes in through caching at the CDN. You no longer send out all the traffic to computers. You have Cloudflare respond with a copy of the file directly to the end user. And especially for things like media streaming, that is massively important, especially in those early days because you're dealing with a huge amount of bandwidth, especially then, lots of people. You want to be able to have that done through a distributed setup. So that was the original idea. We're just going to have a bunch of computers, distribute them across the world so that they're close to end users, and cache other people's stuff on that. That's still true today. That's still one of the main reasons. What then came later is the idea that we have these huge amount of computers. They're all internetworked. We have a network between most of them. We have our own backbones in most setups. It makes sense to also add security features to this because we're already ingesting most of our customers. Most of the customers' traffic is already flowing through us, right? We see all the traffic, so we can also start blocking bots, malicious actors, and also preventing things like distributed denial of service attacks by having them come in through our big network, which has a huge amount of capacity and ability to drop useless traffic or attack traffic before it actually hits the origin. So security was a very normal, organic extension, I think, from the CDN idea. And especially for Akamai now, security is larger than our what you would call delivery part, right? So we do a lot more revenue in security than we do with the actual original CDN delivery and caching setup. So if you're asking what is the business use case, I think mostly twofold still: performance, caching, offload, so that you don't need your own origin servers to scale, but especially also security is more and more, especially in this day and age, a big part of that. The benefits for developers are a bit weird. Uh, my personal opinion, there are a few benefits for developers directly because it just makes their setup more complicated, right? They don't just need to develop for the origin, they also need to develop for the CDN, and they need to keep things in check. They need to think about caching setups and how that works distributedly. So it's more complex from that perspective, but it's less complex than having to do a fully scalable setup yourself on, let's say, something like AWS. So that's it can make it less complex from that perspective. You just shift the complexity to a different system, right? That's pure CDN. If you then talk about things like, say, Cloudflare Workers, or where you can easily sign up, and especially things like Cloudflare Pages, right, where you can very easily host a website and get like an automated build process going and that kind of stuff. That's really like third wave of CDN where we're now moving towards, right? So you had performance and caching, then you had security, and now more and more CDNs are becoming more like cloud services directly, right? Or more and more competing with things like AWS, Azure. In terms of Akamai, we do this very directly, right? We have our own Akamai cloud now, very similar to what those have. Cloudflare is still a bit more, I think, hybrid in the middle. You have cloud-esque things that you can do.
You have what? What did you say you have? I didn't catch the last part.
Oh, okay. So with Cloudflare, you have more like it's not a full cloud, but you have cloud-esque things like workers, like pages, like I just said. They have durable, what are they called? Durable objects or something like that.
Yeah, durable object.
So things you would typically do in a cloud, you can also do within the CDN platform. So the it's becoming more and more of a singular platform that does all those things in slightly different ways depending on the company. But like I said, for me, that's a third wave of CDN, and that is where I do think a lot of benefits for the developers come into, right? Because then you're no longer having to maintain two completely separate systems. Everything is part of this one contiguous thing. You have your performance, you have your security, and you have your origin, your application logic, all in the same platform. I think that has the ability to simplify things massively. But we're not there yet, right? I think this phase has now fully started. We're well in there, but it's definitely not to the point where you would say I can do everything very easily with this one singular platform and everything just works. as you would imagine. You are still seeing this with companies like Vercel and Netlify,
Yeah.
right? They are trying to offer that kind of service, in my viewpoint. Um, but those are very specifically on that one use case. Well, I think companies like Cloudflare and Akamai are, of course, going to go broader, but that takes a bit more time. Phew, that's a long explanation. I hope that makes
That,
sense.
yeah, I think it does. It's a lot of info, which I appreciate. But then, do you consider Netlify to be a CDN? I've never looked at this as a CDN. I just see like it's like a where you can host a website with a distributed like cache or server. I haven't looked at it as a CDN like maybe Akamai or Fastly does.
That's the whole point that I'm trying to make. Those it's becoming
Evolution.
blurrier and blurrier what a CDN is, what is a cloud. Um, you know, it's starting to all merge into one. You need all of those things if you're going to make a scalable website. So definitely, I think Netlify says it themselves as well. They have their own CDN, where they deploy their own service close to end users. They do the edge caching and all of that. They also have edge worker capabilities. Um, so yes, I would consider Netlify and Vercel as a flavor of CDN. They're not
Yeah.
CDN, and they're not the full featured CDN, but they are a type of
Okay. Yeah.
CDN.
That's quite interesting. Yeah, I see how the evolution um is going from initial CDNs being just mostly caching and performance, and then security parts with the firewalls and bot protection, and now they are now
Mhm.
adding bits where you can now run like a bit of compute on the edge, and then also some data services like maybe um, key value data stores for temporary data. Cloudflare now also having like the SQLite on the edge. Uh, I mean, maybe I wouldn't say if it's on the edge because I think the for Cloudflare you see have it's just a single region, um, right?
Yeah. So
Database.
again, the edges are becoming blurry. What is the edge? What is the cloud? What is, how many servers do you actually have? None of that is very clear anymore. And I think companies are also intentionally hiding a little bit of that,
Yeah,
um, to to make it seem maybe like they have a bigger footprint than they actually do in some cases.
yeah. So
No,
sometime evolving into marketing
yeah,
lingo
yeah,
to make it to get by.
exactly.
Yeah,
I do think some companies are saying they are a CDN, but they maybe have barely 20 different points of presence globally, right? So is that a real CDN? That's debatable. But the concepts are the same. No matter how many servers you actually have, the same concepts are being applied. And I think that's, from a technical discussion perspective, is what matters, right? You're trying to do the same thing. It's just the scale that is different.
yeah. That's interesting. Yeah, so like it just gets blurry, like you said, like for me thinking about it some days ago, like what actually now is a CDN? Um, um, I- does it is it by the I mean edge is also a different topic because when people say edge, some people try to look at things like CDNs and Cloudflare and Akamai. Some people when they say edge, they actually mean like including like IoT devices, your mobile phones. So
Oh,
everything gets blurry. You have people that release databases and they call it, uh, they move from calling it serverless and saying edge database. And then you're wondering, does edge or CDN refer to how many point of presence they have or what is exactly CDN? I think for people that have been in the game longer, like I think you asked the right question, like, what do you mean by the edge? What does your CDN provide for people early in the programming careers, maybe 2 or 5 years ago? Where Edge was the boss was went from serverless to Edge, so they usually find it hard to make the distinction, and that's quite interesting where we found ourselves today.
I fully agree with that, and I hate the way that these new buzzwords are being used, and and they're not always being used for the same thing, right? That's like what you said. What is the edge? People are using so many different definitions for the edge right now. I know one company that has a bare 20 points of presence, and they're talking about the edge, which to
Yeah,
me is ridiculous, right?
yeah,
I see why they're doing it, but it's kind of ridiculous. Um, but yeah, it's more terminology. I think they should always be very clear in their documentation about what exactly they're deploying and where it is. And very few companies do that, and
yeah,
that's a big problem for me, especially for new developers to learn about this stuff.
yeah. I think I was also talking to you about like building a CDN, for example. Like, can people build their own CDN? In my head, the CDN was more like the caching layer, where you have the cache where you can be able to send out content close to the user, and maybe that caching layer, and then maybe you have it in, let's say, if I'm in Europe, you have it in 50 locations closer to your users in Europe. I think maybe I could call that my CDN, because even though it
Yeah,
doesn't have security aspects in it, but it's just about the content. We can have dedicated video CDN, or just for your website.
yep.
Yeah, and if, in your opinion, if someone has like maybe 30 locations where they have data centers, or maybe they bought VMs and they are able to distribute. Should they also say they are a CDN if they have like some kind of content delivery services in those locations?
Like I said, if they want to, they can. I'm not the CDN police. uh, in in the end, that's the whole point, right? What is a CDN? Is a CDN a combination of all those things, or is a CDN the very original CDN? Like what I said, is just that distributed caching setup.
Yeah,
Um, if you're like, okay, it's still just conceptually, CDN stands for Content Delivery Network, right? So from that perspective, you could indeed say we're using our own CDN. But what you're really doing is just running uh, 20 different caching proxies in 20 different data centers with some cloud provider, right?
yeah,
And again, I think whatever you're building or communicating should make that clear. What you're running and where, uh, and and then it becomes much easier to see what you're doing, and then people can decide themselves if you are a real CDN per their uh, per their definition or not, right? And that's the thing, you asked me like, how would you build your own CDN, and I said you wouldn't. It's just too complex. And what I meant by that is indeed the whole thing, right? With the thousands of points of presence and the caching and security and edge compute and all of that good stuff added. If you just want to build a distributed caching layer, that's of course eminently possible and practical, and also something we recommend our customers do on Akamai. So
yeah.
it's
And another terminology I think I started noticing last month. I mean, probably not a lot of people use it, but some people that tend to look like a CDN, they call themselves like website accelerators. I'm struggling to know. Okay, is there a difference between, in a product perspective, CDN and website accelerators, or and also between like a caching software or proxy, and I think Vanish, or one of them, puts on their documentation, they call themselves website accelerator. So on the technology part, is there like some difference, or are they just the same thing but different lingo for different people?
there definitely used to be a big difference between the two concepts. Let me give you an example. There didn't used to be JavaScript and CSS minification is not something that used to be done as part of the pipeline. right? In my day, when you wrote JavaScript CSS, you would just host whatever code you wrote directly on there without running into a post processor like Webpack or something like that. And your web servers that you would have wouldn't have support for things like gzip compression, right? And so when the CDN started, they would do caching, but they would also do those extra, what Akamai, for example, called them front-end optimization things. That, for example, minified your files, that compressed the files at the edge, so that your origin wouldn't have to do it. So that it's caching, but then more extra in caching. And Akamai still has a couple of these features. For example, we do like automated font preloading, for example, is one of those few features we still have. But more and more and more, all of those fancy, what you call website accelerator things, have been developers have taken to doing that themselves as part of the development process, so that you no longer need to do this at the edge, right? One exception to that is probably things like image compression services, right? Because you typically don't want to do all of that as part of the development process, generate all of those different images in the different formats and deal the caching with that separately. So that is something that you typically still offload to a CDN, and which is to me one of the biggest web performance features that CDNs have in addition to caching now. But all those other smaller things are now just part of default web performance web development workflows, which is a good thing, right?
Yeah.
That we were able to switch that, because now everybody gets that by default without even using a CDN. So that's good.
Yeah, cool. That's interesting. Interesting to know because now I'm seeing those terminologies and trying to also make the difference. And you mentioned, I know you mentioned cache proxies, and I'm just thinking for like the CDNs. Aside from you mentioned having like a point of presence, is there like specialized hardware that these companies need for this kind of caching and distribution? And also, aside from cache proxies, what else power these kind of services?
I don't think you need special hardware per se for the delivery part. You just need beefy computers and especially beefy routers, switches, that kind of stuff, right, to handle the network stuff. What you do need special hardware for is for most of the security um, features, right? Especially nowadays when you want to store your, let's say, encryption keys in a separate secure memory thing or something like that. That is being done in hardware nowadays. Um, Maybe some specialized NICs, so network interface cards. But again, mostly to handle the network traffic. The most of the software is still being done as normal software, um, where most of the CDNs run their own software to an extent. Like Akamai is fully custom. We have a platform called Ghost, Global Host, that's fully internal. Cloudflare started with Nginx, heavily modified version of Nginx, and I think they moved away from that a couple of years ago, but don't quote me on that. But they now have a fully custom version, or at least for most of it. And then I think Fastly is mostly varnish based, but I think they also have like a huge amount of custom stuff tackled onto that for their things. So custom hardware, not that much. Custom software, a ton. A huge amount of custom software that you need to run a CDN, as you might expect. Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. Then that's a lot of it takes a lot of massive investment to have something that's at the scale of Akamai or Fastly because you need different but software, hardware, a lot of customization. I know I also saw uh, someone, I think he's based in the US. I'll probably have him later on the live stream, maybe by the end of the month. He also has, I think he's building like a CDN. And I know they are running, I think, Caddy server. And
Caddy. Yep.
yeah, and there's a caching layer or middleware on top of it to do the caching. And also on the website it says CDN and all. And I'm curious if they have a modified version of Caddy, or if it's just Caddy and caching and then a few point of presence. So
Again, you can get, what would it be, 90% of a CDN with off-the-shelf software probably, but then you need custom custom stuff for the really hard stuff, right? For the
yeah,
really scalable stuff, for the really difficult stuff, you will need custom stuff built on top of that. But for basic use cases, yes, you can get quite far with open source software nowadays as well.
yeah. I saw I found an Apache traffic server recently, and also I think as part of under the foundation, there's also traffic control, which they mention as
Mhm.
like a CDN, like open source CDN with like observability and cache proxy and all. And I think a couple of companies use it. I mean, obviously, maybe they will have some also customization behind it. I can't remember the name. One of them, I think they are like a video streaming platform, and those are one of the things I was curious. Like, okay, if you take the software and then you deploy it like in many locations around the world, does that also mean a CDN? How do you put in like the security part? Because you also have to think of if you are competing with, or rather offering similar service as what CDNs are today, you have to also think of the security. But if you want to be ahead, you're also looking at like uh, like workers like running computer at the edge, image optimization. So how do you also give your
Exactly. Yeah.
users that? Because people are no longer 10 years back running just caching. We need more services.
Yeah. And I think you can't do, that's what I was trying to say as well. You can't do that full CDN just based on open source software
Yeah,
today. Or I mean,
yeah. But I
conceptually
guess
you can, but
yeah, maybe for example, if I have just an e-commerce store that targets just users in maybe Germany, and then I just want to have, okay, if my users travel to Belgium, France, Amsterdam, and then I have like machines running on those locations and running cache proxies there too. I guess I can get similar performance just on the caching layer, not the security part.
yeah.
I think that's also part where if you think you can't afford a huge CDN because they might also cost you a lot more, um
Yeah,
then I
because
guess
they do a lot more.
yeah, yeah,
uh, this this one final aspect that we haven't mentioned yet that I do think is important there as well, that is difficult, is load balancing
okay,
or routing. It's one thing to say, oh, we're going to deploy 20 servers worldwide, and then a whole other thing to make sure that someone in Belgium connects to the Belgian server and not to the German server that is much farther away, right?
yeah,
And that is typically a quite a bit more involved and difficult to set up and manage. And that's also something that I'm probably wrong here, but I don't know any open source software that makes that very easy to do, right? Because you either need to do very fine grained DNS based routing and load balancing, or you need to start setting up anycast
yeah,
things, and that is even more complex, especially if you don't have full control over all your servers and network appearing setups. Um, so it's definitely possible, but if you want to do the CDN with any type of reliability and ability to fall back and that kind of stuff, um, you
yeah,
quickly start getting into those problems as well. I'm not saying they're not manageable or doable at a limited scale, but the moment you try to scale up that's an important aspect that I think is difficult as well. It's more than just deploying caching proxies
yeah.
in different locations, right?
Yeah, I think, yeah, like you said, there's a lot that goes into it, like how to route the right request. I know, reading about it, I saw something about geo IPs that could do this, but also I think people are also moving to Anycast because of limited IP, maybe IPv4, maybe they are better, and
Hmm.
uh, in that regard. But I don't know if I think any cat probably only just knows how to route which machines to route to, but it doesn't do the load balancing. So probably you also need to do that on
No, no.
your
And Anycast automatically routes to your closest server.
yeah.
Let's
A-
say.
And
Uh,
then on that server, probably you figure out how to route requests. Because I use fly.io for like server-based stuff now, and they run Anycast servers, and they have a proxy that knows which region or machine closest to the request to route to. And they
mhm.
also
Yep.
have this feature where you can also replay the request on the different machine, which I think is really awesome. So those are some of the possibilities around things that are available.
Mhm.
Yeah. Any other thing you want to mention before I ask one more question around?
No, I guess we only have a few more minutes, so feel
Yeah.
free to ask the next question.
Yeah. So I know you mentioned IETF, and I'm not sure what they do. I know I've seen that word a bit, but I recently was chatting to one professor. I think he's in France that built. I think his library is called Sewing. I'm not sure if I pronounce it correct, but it's like a caching uh, plugin, I would say, for like Cardi traffic
Mhm.
servers. And I think he mentioned something about HTTP, like the RFC 911 about HTTP caching spec, and I see all those are in IETF. So I'm curious, what is this IETF? And when it comes to like CDN and caching, is everything defined on the CDN? I think for CDN there's no really specification, but for like how caching works on HTTP, there's a specification. If you can walk through that a bit.
Yep. Excellent. So the IETF is really, in its most simple, it's just all the big companies, right? The Microsofts, the Apples, the Akamais, and the Cloudflares. They need some way to interoperate, right? Because Akamai needs to get content from a backend server that is maintained by a different company. And we need to send content to the Chrome web browser, which is maintained by Google, let's say, for example, right? And so we need like a common agreement on how to transfer data and what all of that means so that these different softwares can actually do the correct thing with all of this. And that's what you do through the protocols, right? That's why you have HTTP, that's why you have Quick. You have one reusable thing that everybody agrees on. This is what it should be. Even though the implementations are different, the basic semantics are the same. And so, how do you agree on what that base thing should look like? That's the IETF. So all these big companies, they just send a couple of engineers. That's literally what it is. We have like 3 meetings a year where it's like 1,000 to 2,000 people, which are just engineers and technical people from all the big companies, and then a couple of academics from the universities, for example. They come in and they just discuss amongst themselves, like we need a protocol for to do this kind of thing. How to best do this, and it's a group discussion in essence, with people making a proposal like, I think we should do it like this. Oh, I like this proposal, but maybe we can tweak it like this. It's really just that. It's a loose organization where people just come to collaborate on these protocols, and what they then agree on that gets written into these RFCs. So RFC stands for request for comment. Originally, the idea would be like these engineers wrote a whole document like this is what we want to do or this is how we want to do it. If there are any comments, feel free to let us know how to improve things. That's the original RFC thing. For now, RFC basically means it's a standard or a proposed standard.
Yeah, I see. Oh, that's
And so
interesting.
CDNs by themselves are not standardized or anything like that, but they use things like HTTP, of course, and HTTP caching that is fully standardized. And that's actually a big issue in practice because a lot of times you will have CDNs wanting to do additional things that are not yet in those standards. that haven't been discussed yet. And so each CDN starts doing their own thing in their own special little way.
Yeah.
Uh, and then eventually customers get fed up enough that CDNs then come together and say, okay, let's now fix this for real. Let's try to make this Google specification that everybody uses in the same. And that's the
Oh,
standard mostly work nowadays. Not all, but a lot of times it will be one or two companies doing their own thing, noticing what works, what does not work. Then they bring that to the IETF and say, let's now collaborate and make this into something everybody can use. Which is exactly what happened with HTTP3 and Quick. Google started that internally, implemented that on things like YouTube and in Google Chrome, found out what worked, what didn't. Then they brought it to the IETF, which then transformed it. I think the final version of Quick is very different in terms of mechanics than the original Google version through the collaboration. But so now we have the Quick RFCs that everybody can use
was that
widely.
from was that from Cloudflare? The because I think they contributed some quick stuff, but I wasn't sure if they wrote the one that
Oh,
is.
Cloudflare definitely contributed a lot of quick stuff, but so did Akamai, so did Microsoft, Apple, Facebook.
Uh,
It was a huge, huge amount of companies. I think Quick was the largest working group in the IETF in years.
wow.
Um, broad collaboration. This is definitely not something for one or two companies. This is everybody came together to work on Quick because it's such a very, very special new evolution in the internet, right? We are moving away from TCP, which for a long time was completely unthinkable, and everybody was invested in making sure that we did it right. And so that's also why Quick took such a long time to standardize. I think it took about 6 years, which is quite long. Yeah.
Yeah, I like so one standard that I know I read recently that I think is quite interesting was the I've forgotten the number. I think it's targeted cache control header. I think it was contributed from one person from Cloudflare, maybe one from Akamai, and so now you have like a targeted cache control header that CDNs you can use to direct CDNs on what to do,
Mm-hmm.
which I think gives them better control on how they
Yep.
handle those. That is quite nice. Uh, I know this RFCs usually when a new specification comes out, it obsoletes a previous one, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
curious how because I'm reading this RFC 911 and I see it obsoletes the past HTTP caching
Mm-hmm.
mechanism, and I'm wondering how do browsers and CDN handle this? Do they have some kind of backward compatibility, or does the specification have backward compatibility on this?
Oh, that's a difficult question. It depends on the specific RFC and what you do. Some RFCs have backwards compatibility built in.
Uh-huh.
Um, some things that are actually versioned, the implementations will have backwards compatibility. But the main thing I think you might not realize is that it's not because it's a standard or an RFC that the implementations also follow that 100%. It's not because the RFC says you have to do this that the implementation is actually going to do that. In fact, a lot of times they don't.
Just
They
like the
still,
browsers.
yeah, exactly. Like browsers often have things that they don't implement for an RFC if they implement too much or in a slightly different way. Um, and that's also one of the reasons these RFC gets updated and obsoleted, right? They make an RFC, everybody should use this, but 10 years later, they notice like, oh, this part, nobody uses it like this anymore, or this was useless. And this thing is being done completely differently. So it makes sense to change this to what people are actually doing. So it's rarely the case that an RFC, I think, gets updated and then people need to change the implementations. It's usually implementations start doing things differently, and then the RFCs are updated to reflect what is
Um,
happening in the wild, um, or should reflect what is happening in the wild,
yeah.
um, like that.
That's
At
interesting.
least the RFCs that I know about. I can't talk about all the stuff, but
Oh,
everything with the RFC, like the new list of the so HTTP one got the updated RFCs that you're referring to, the 911 or the 91XX things. Those are mostly to stay updated with what's actually happening internally, and then to update some of the text with some of the new terminology that later
yeah.
HTTP things use. For example, structured headers and stuff
Oh,
made it necessary to revert or to update the text for the only ones to, how should I say, to make it clearer how to implement HTTP one for some of the newer things that were coming out.
uh,
Uh,
right. That's quite interesting because I also saw one in draft for cache invalidation,
yeah,
and I was just curious. So maybe I'll find time to read.
good.
But then some stuff are just also complex for me because it's just the first time I'm going deep a bit on this topics and learning about it.
Yeah, that's. I think it's a very good viewpoint. Like you think caching has been done since 20 years, right? By now we should know everything that we could do with caching and everything is standardized. You would think
Yeah.
so, but it's completely different. We are still proposing new things to standardize for caching every single year. Um, most of that driven by CDNs. For looking at that, the one that you are talking about, I think, is, for example, one of the things we're helping drive from Akamai.
Oh,
So yeah.
nice. Yeah, because I mean, the way people deploy software are also changing. We're coming to almost rounding up the time, so I don't take so much
Mhm.
of your time. I would just ask two questions just to wrap up. One would be, um, how can people or someone like me learn more about this web performance or CDNs and caching to understand it, especially for me from the point of caching and cache proxies and also maybe HTTP.
Um, so there, especially if you're looking for the basics, there is this wonderful online book called High Performance Browser Networking, and it's I just sent you the link in the chat that you can add to YouTube as well. So it's
Okay.
HPBN, so High Performance Browser Networking, the first letters .co. It's a free online book from Ilya Grigorik, um, and it explains all the basics of the protocols, the basics of HTTP, CDNs, why they're needed, how all of that stuff works internally. It's definitely a little bit getting old, not super old. Like it definitely doesn't contain all the latest and greatest. For example, it doesn't speak about HTTP 3, but the basics are in there. So if you're looking for a good place to start, that's always where I direct people to.
Yeah,
Um,
I'll check
yeah,
that
I
out.
guess.
And does it make sense? Sorry, you wanted to say something?
No, no, that's it.
And does it make sense from a user perspective to read like this HTTP specification, or should I just go to MDN as a user and just read what's an MDN and read it?
uh, a normal user probably should never read the RFCs.
Okay, but
They're
if
not
you're
written. They're not written for end users. They're for implementers.
also if you're doing
Um,
stuff like cache proxies or cache middleware,
yeah,
you
yeah. If
can.
you're making it yourself, then you really need to read the RFCs. But they can be very vague on what they actually mean or why things. And then you would MDN is okay for some things. I'm not the biggest fan of MDN for technical concepts myself. I would primarily look at blog posts
Oh,
that
okay.
dig deep into specific topics
Oh,
for those kinds of things. Yeah.
how interesting because I always go to MDN and just read through.
MDM is a great resource and it has a lot of stuff, but it's also lacking
Right.
a lot of stuff in my opinion. Um, but yeah, let's not go
Yeah.
too deep into that.
Okay.
Um, yeah.
And then any final words about yourself, where people can find you, maybe something else you want to promote before we wrap up?
Yeah. So I'm still active on Twitter, refusing to call it X, obviously. Also, more and more on LinkedIn nowadays. Um, for that, you can also feel free to reach out to me through email, which you can easily find online as well. Much like Peter did. Peter just sent me a Twitter DM, and suddenly I'm in a live stream. So I'm very open to, what I'm trying to say is, I'm very open to discussing this kind of thing with people who have questions, who want to learn more. I also have YouTube videos on my YouTube channel focusing on web performance and HTTP3 and Quick specifically. So also quite active there.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I would agree, yes, that you are very open, and I was surprised that you responded. I mean, maybe some days later, but it was also pretty far from someone from a stranger, and I'm very happy that you agreed to do this. Actually, you were the first person that agreed before I had my first guest, and then I reached out to a couple of other persons you recommended. I didn't hear back yet. I followed up, but I'm hoping I can get more people to share their information, because I didn't ask you a lot that I would have hoped to ask. Maybe you will be a repeat guest in the future. Maybe
I don't
I
know.
get I get other people to be able to get back to me and have them come chat online. But I appreciate you for that. I wish you a happy Friday and have a great weekend, Robin.
Excellent. Thanks a lot for having me, and good luck with the rest of the show,
Yeah,
and learn more about CDNs.
yeah. Thank you. Have a nice day.